I had this young gentleman, he's probably about 70 years old, by the name of Brian Smith, and he owned Uggs. He was the founder of Uggs. And he had come into my shed, and we were actually have a conversation about the Uggs. And this gentleman, I said, you got to meet Faisal Karmali. And the reason why, go on his podcast and tell your story. And he'd said, yeah, let's definitely go do that. We went downtown and I got to sit there and watch this master basically put art together on a podcast and put his whole team together on the 25th floor of an amazing building, an amazing opportunity. And he interviewed Brian Smith from Uggs. Creating curiosity by asking better questions. This is Shed Talk. Welcome to Shed Talk.
Oh, thank you for having me. Look at this. This is fantastic.
It is absolutely amazing because the day I met you, and I remember sitting there and in your studio and you had your team there, and I sat there and I watched everybody go into play and how you did your intro, how you did it. And it was poetic and it was interesting. And I remember looking at it, so I'm thinking, how did he do that? And when you first did it, and I'm going, I'm going to do a podcast. And I watched you do it. And it was that moment that inspired me to make sure that I did a great job.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
Yeah.
So I was always curious, you asked a lot of questions after, you chatted with the team and wanted to know how everything was. Where did you get this? How did you do this? And I was wondering, that's the first person that asked that many questions about my team and how things were set up. And well, here we are now at the podcast and look at this.
I know. And it's absolutely amazing. And that's where it all comes about. Entrepreneurship, being curious, asking ourselves a better question,
right.
And how do we grow with that?
Absolutely.
So here we are. First question.
Okay.
What do you do?
Yeah. So I've got multiple hats, as every entrepreneur does. I run a wealth management practice with a business partner of mine, and that's our main gig that we have. And I've also put my tentacles in a whole bunch of other businesses as well. And also I have a couple of shows, 2 podcasts, one on retirement and transitioning out of retirement, and one on the entrepreneurs, which you saw Brian part of. And that's called the Karmali Exchange. And then on top of that, I'm also a father of 3, a husband and a brother and a son and family man. So it's a lot of hats that I wear.
So wearing all these hats as an entrepreneur, doing everything you do, what seems to be the biggest challenge that you have?
Putting me first. I would say when you wear the hats in such large quantity, you're always worrying about others. You're always trying to look for the results. And sometimes you don't put yourself first. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. I'm a terrible golfer. Kevin, I'm terrible, but I love the sport. And so I really wanted to up my game in 2024. Well, I got in a few rounds and did a little bit of practicing, but I didn't put that as a priority for me, even though I wanted to. And so I found myself doing things that were not necessarily the number 1, 2, or 3 things on my list for me, because it was benefiting what the bigger goal was, which was other people, family members, the businesses, and so forth. So the biggest struggle, at least for the last, call it 5 years, has been putting me first.
So when you talk about putting yourself first, and you just talked about golf, now you made it sound like it wasn't successful. Now, was the golf, when you said you went out to practice, was it because of your handicap, or was it about how many times that you went?
Both, actually. Yeah, it's a good question. I think you keep on using the golf analogy, but that was something I wanted to do just for me. It wasn't to get on a pro tour or, do anything with golf except for enjoy my time for me. And so practicing would help me get better, but also help me fall in love with the game. So that was part of it. But I found that I was always saying, yeah, I'll go next week or I'll go next day or something like that, because there's other things in the way and I didn't put myself first. And this is just an analogy or an example of other things such as health, fitness, diet, all the other things that I pushed aside for other reasons that I look back now going, maybe I should have done that.
Now you look back and maybe shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Yeah.
So if you were to look and you're looking for the future, what's that one thing today that you should change?
Yeah. So that's the first thing that I need to change, is starting to love myself more. Focus on me. And what makes me, and the word happy, I don't really always like that word because I think it's a feeling in the moment. But what makes me fulfilled or fills my cup? And there are certain things that will definitely be part of the business world, being part of my family that fills my cup. But there's always a bit of that cup that's empty every single year. Those things are the experiences I want to have. I'm a big sports travel fan. I enjoy playing a few sports. It's all about what I want to get out of it versus what others will want to do with me and so forth. So I've really said to fill my cup, I need to focus on me.
So when you talk about filling your cup, what advice would you give for somebody else that's looking for that same transition, that they need to focus on themselves? Because as entrepreneurs, and we talk about this, that, oh yeah, we're out there for everybody else, we're doing this, but what are we giving back to ourselves, like our self-serving?
Right.
What advice would you do, or what do you recommend?
Yeah.
Because I'm talking about guys in their 50s.
Yeah.
Okay. And what
Which
do you
I
see?
am now. So yeah. And so it's, when we talk about being an entrepreneur and we hustle and grind as much as we do get a benefit of it. It's not like we're giving up everything and not getting anything in return. There is a financial side of it that gets beneficial. There is an ego side of it. There's a vision that you have that you want to see come true. These are different things that definitely help. But when you start looking at yourself, the one tip or advice I would say is what truly fills your cup. And that takes a lot of work to do. So that's many thousands of dollars of therapy, let me tell you that. And then when you realize that it could be the smallest thing, like golf, that can help fill your cup, then you got to start building an execution plan on that. No different than our businesses, right? When we have something to do, why isn't that the first thing or one of the first things that you do? It's because you put it in the back burner. So let's not put that in the back burner. So that's the one tip I would definitely say.
So what do you recognize in people? And then we talked a little bit just before we got on the air here about basically guys over 50 and the older generation, where we're at, the untold story of that demographics between 50 and 75.
In my line of work where I get to speak to, wealthy entrepreneurs who have gone through all the ups and downs, when they get to the spot where they're now going to live off their savings. So let's call that word retirement, for lack of a better word. There's a big void that happens. They're accustomed to having 60, 70, 80 hours a week being occupied by their businesses or their job in some cases. They have identified themselves around their occupation, and they have really focused on that and not had a real look at what's really going to fill their time for the 30 years after they've moved on from their businesses or from their career. And then that void, that internal depression kicks in. They just start to focus on things that are not as important. They need to feel like they're in control. And so from a financial perspective or from their family, they try to control things. And there's a lot that you can't control. And that causes a lot more anger and fear and in many cases, depression. And I've seen that time and time again, and especially since the pandemic. It's really come clear that generally speaking, men over the age of 50 have a hard time transitioning to the next phase of their life. That we'll call that retirement.
And when you look at that retirement stage and men over 50, and some of them, and I'm just going to use this as an avatar,
Sure.
Some of them have gone through, my avatar, I look at, they're over 55, couple divorces,
Yep.
trying to find themselves.
Yep.
They're out of shape, they're in shape, out of shape. They're looking for this, and they live in an apartment. They do okay.
Yeah.
Their first wife has the house, second wife has the house, and the two kids in
Yeah.
this. And it seems to be like I look at it as like it's a pandemic, and I didn't realize how large that scale is.
Yeah.
And when we talk about wealth, health, and mindset as a whole, that's a big, big nut.
I wish we had statistics from the government that would actually track this stuff. They don't narrow it down on gender, amount of times you've been divorced, all the issues that come up with that, failed businesses, successful businesses, career changes, layoffs, severance packages. They don't lump it all together. And in our society, I believe that a lot of men have taken it on their shoulders that the value they add is the ability to provide. And when you go into that transition into retirement, what are you providing? You're not doing anything to be the provider, and that causes the spiral.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when they're over 55, the older generation, they're supposed to be strong, and this is the way it is. This is how it's supposed to be, and then the mindset just totally changes. Due to the fact is their younger self, which would be born today, would be they're okay with mental health. They'll go get therapy. They'll go get looked after.
Yeah.
Versus where they are today, they'll say, "No, I can just handle it." And one of the interesting things is like bladder cancer with men. How many men actually go out and actually get checked on bladder cancer? And all it is if you're peeing yellow, go get checked.
Yeah.
But they don't want anybody to touch their unit. They say, "Oh, no, I'm okay, I'm okay." Yet it's one of the most curable, yet most deadly. And it's very interesting that men, and this is the older, over 55, actually stay away from having somebody do, "Oh, I'm a man, I don't want anybody touching that."
You know, it's interesting you're saying that, because when I talk to, and I'll say it's closer to the 75 years of age range, okay? The number one purchase from the clients that we work with over the age of 70 for 2024 was hips and knees, okay? So to get an individual, generally the man, to admit that there's something wrong first with any part of their body is a step on its own. Then to go get help, and then to actually say, I want to spend the money to go to private care anywhere in the world. These are people that can go anywhere in the world to get this done. They would rather sit in the medical system for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months to get it done until they can't. And then the phone call says, start taking some money out. I'm heading off to Lithuania, or I'm heading off to the United States, or I'm going to Mexico to get a knee or a hip replaced. Unbelievable how they tend to defer because they think they can handle it. They've been trained from a very young age that no matter what happens, just ball it up and move on. And unfortunately, it's not always the case.
It'd be interesting. How would you address that to somebody? As here you are in finance, and then you're doing that. How would you actually be able to tell somebody, say, listen, I understand your concern. You're going to be 75 years old, hip and was it hip and knee?
Knees, yeah.
Knees, your largest contributor to healthcare. I'm assuming it's healthcare.
Yeah.
And if that's going to be an issue in the future, obviously healthcare will be an issue.
Correct.
How do you tell these people, or tell men as an example, get on it earlier?
Oh, it's the hardest thing. So what I've done in my wealth management practice is started building up a monthly session for our clients to understand everything that's non-financial, such as health. So we have a session every single month, either online or in person. We bring in experts from all different disciplines, health and mental health included. And so our job is to educate and inform. I don't know all the answers. I don't profess to know all the answers, but we will get the answers for you if we can find the right people to connect you with. And so we've turned our practice from just being a wealth management to just being people management. We're actually managing our clients and their experiences through retirement. And so part of this is the education side. So we have brought in mental health professionals. We have brought in, doctors, and we've also shown some of the statistics of what happens if you delay these types of surgeries, because the recovery rate and the rehabilitation time when you're in your 70s is way harder than if you're in your 60s. And people wait that long. They wait. And some people don't even do it. But the people who've delayed the actual surgeries and so forth, purely because they don't want to spend the money, so they don't see value in it, which is one of my big pet peeves. The compounding effect of the issues as you get older and older is just rippling, and it's unbelievable what they've allowed themselves to do.
And it's interesting because you just mentioned about 75 years old, okay, hip replacement. You're doing this training program.
Yeah.
Sorry, not a training program, an informational seminar. And how many men out there? So I'm going to go 55 because at 55, all of a sudden you're talking about your health. At 60, all of a sudden when you're meeting with your buddies or you're meeting with somebody, the first thing you're saying, how you're doing? Oh, you know what? My shoulder's out, or you know what? I did this.
Right.
Yet that first contact comes into the next. Where do you go from there to get more advice versus all of a sudden, oh, I got to go to a doctor, I got to do this? who's putting it out there, which is, it sounds exactly what you're doing and saying, I'm going to give you an information seminar, guys, and say, listen, let's just get you here, have a conversation. Doesn't matter how much money you have or don't have, but I'm going to give you the first step of what health looks like, as in be prepared in 10 years. This is the shoulda, coulda, wouldas
Yeah.
versus let's do the action call today.
Correct. It's part of the first part is to educate and inform. Absolutely. Second part is to build a plan. And so if you're a solo retiree, you're male, generally you don't have anybody to take care of you as you age. So what's the health plan look like? God forbid you can't do your daily activities at home, cook, clean, mow the lawn, whatever else you're doing. Who the hell do you give that to? Who's the person that's going to help you make those decisions if you're unable to make them yourself? What happens to all those activities that need to be quote unquote outsourced to some company to do them for you? Let's pick on lawn maintenance as an example. How do you organize all that if you're unable to do it yourself? This is the program we implemented with our clients, saying, okay, I call it the fire extinguisher plan. In the event something goes wrong in my building, we all know where the fire extinguisher is. We all know how to use it. In the event happens, open up that glass and away you go. This is the same kind of program we want to have for all of our clients. And so our especially our men, because they believe only two things are going to happen. They're going to live to a certain age and then they're going to die. And they don't realize there's a big gap in between, which could have a not so great experience medically, physically. And so they need to fill that gap. And that gap needs to be covered by a plan. Now, if they're not a solo retiree, they have a significant other, they kind of just leave it to their spouse to deal with. Try picking up a man who's 100 pounds heavier than you, or try doing all the activities that you were doing in your home and take care of your loved one. That's a lot of burden you're putting on your significant other. So what's the plan? What's the blue jobs and pink jobs that happen in that house? If you're going to outsource them or not, what does it cost? How do you implement it? If we get a phone call from any one of our clients that this shit happened, we get to work. We know down the list, Kevin selected. He wants to outsource all of his lawn care. He wants to make sure the snow is shoveled. So then we just get all concierge together and we put them all out and say, here are all the vendors. You can vet them, you can hire them, you can do what you want, but that's one less step for our clients. So it's not only the education piece, it's an implementation plan in the fire extinguisher idea that God forbid something happens, you've got a team ready to work with you. I've noticed this trend as we age and how the medical system and is happening in this province. And it frustrates me, but I also have to be proactive in this. So I can't just leave it to the government to figure it out. I can't leave it to people to get together and figure it out. I have to put an implementation. Layer that on top of it, we've got a wide variety of clients. Let's use 55 to 85. What a 55-year-old is worrying about, an 85-year-old's already gone through that. So they can give advice saying, hey, when you're 55, you're worried about your retirement. When you're 75, you're going to worry about your health care. Here's what you need to think about. And at 55, generally speaking, they somewhat have care for their elderly parents as well. So how do you do that? So this is our job here in our practice is not just to talk about these things, but actually have a plan in place. And it's scary to see how many men are just leaving it up to hopes, dreams, and desires that everything works out.
Take a minute and smash that subscribe button, and let's get back to the episode. And when you look at that, because that's a brand new idea and concept, you're listening to that for the first time and actually going, geez, I never really thought about that, because it's like, oh, nothing, it's not going to happen to me.
Right.
Here's where I'm at. It's that's somebody else's issue.
Right. And
then when you're mentioning that and saying, wait a second, I got to be proactive. If I'm going to be doing this for the future, here's where it is. Now let's add another layer to it. Now, people talk about healthcare. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have their investments. How do you see old age pension, like all that stuff? Like what's going to happen with what's going to happen in the government wise?
Yeah, let's separate the two different incomes that come, generally speaking, to a 65-year-old individual. Number one is Canadian pension plan, if you've contributed. Entrepreneurs generally don't contribute to Canadian pension plan. So they're left their own devices to build their own pension plan via savings to their company or outside of that. Then there's old age security. Now, what's interesting in Canada about old age security is that there's a clawback provision, which means if you as an individual are making more than $90,000 of income, then they start to claw back how much of the old age security. I would not be surprised at some time in the future, the government changes that $90,000 threshold down to 60,000 or some number lower than 90, because that's a big burden on the tax base as you have an aging demographic and more people you're giving what Americans call Social Security, what we call old age security. So I'm not as concerned about the Canadian pension plan. That's great. Actuary looks fantastic. It's the old age security that I'm worried about. Now, Canadians in general have a value system that if you have a certain amount of income or below, society will take care of you. The people will take care of you, which is why we have old age security and government income supplement. But after that, it's middle Canada, meaning you're not a gazillionaire and you're making more than, let's call it $75,000 of income, which doesn't go far in many cities in Canada. You might not have that government program anymore. And so now what do you do? Now we're not there today, but if I was to forecast out for the next generation, that's a big tax burden for a lot of people.
So in 2024, what was your greatest accomplishment for 2024 last year?
Realizing I wasn't putting myself first.
And for 2025?
What is going to be?
Correct.
Putting myself first.
And what's the first thing you're doing?
So right off the get-go, I don't do New Year's resolutions, Kevin. I don't really believe in that stuff. I prefer to have just the goals and steps to get there. So the goal is to put myself first. Number one, I definitely want to get more golf time in. So I put in 20 rounds of golf, and I want to make sure that I can work towards having a handicap that's not terrible. Okay, so let's go better than 100.
Better than 100. Okay,
better than 100. Okay. I'm internally I like to get to below 90, but I want to be realistic. I suck at this sport, so let's go there. Number two, I have a core group of people that are my heart, soul, and driver in my world, friends and family. I want to have 6 experiences, one with each of those 6 individuals that I can have, that I can keep for the rest of my life. So that's part of my memories. And some of it might be sports travel, some of it might be other things. So that's number 2. And then number 3, I want to make sure that I'm putting enough time for me to actually take the physical fitness up well. I work out 2-3 times a week. I kind of do this intermittent fasting, and then but it's not dialed down where I feel good about stepping on the scale, or I feel good in front of a camera. I'm not doing this for a weight or trying to make it into bodybuilding or anything. I want to look in the mirror and go, not bad, not even good, not bad,
but not bad. Just so you feel comfortable with yourself in the mirror.
Yeah. I don't want to look in the mirror when I'm getting changed going, what the hell was that, right? And so that's where I am right now, at least. So I want to change that.
It's like one of those things that I remember years ago when I used to have a shower and I'd look down and I go, oh, I can't see anything down there. Yeah. That's when you knew you were big, is going, okay. Yeah. And then saying, okay, there's a problem here. That's overweight. But you don't know you're overweight until you're in shape. You don't know you're in shape until you're in shape.
Right.
You don't know you're in jail until you break out. And It's one of those things that you have no idea until you're actually doing something totally different.
Right. And it's not, and what I've done in 2024 from a physical fitness perspective and health perspective is I started collecting the metrics. I started looking at all the different numbers that are required. What's my body mass? What's my BMI index? What's my fat content? I've been looking at that, and I've been seeing the trend over the year, my weight and so forth, how much am I, what's my blood levels and everything else in regards to that. I actually hired a private doctor to help me with this stuff versus just winging it or watching your TikToks or whatever to see what the heck to do. So I've started the foundation of that. Now I got to put more energy and emphasis on execution.
So, question for you: you're on CTV, okay, and you're doing all your stuff there, and where you're at, and you look great. So obviously you can't put on too much weight, because doesn't the camera put 10 pounds on you or something like
at
that?
least, yeah.
So everything that you're doing, what has been your greatest success and your greatest failure?
So the greatest success, when you're speaking of being on TV? Sorry.
No, everything. I'm going to talk everything as a whole, because I'm going to go into another segment about mentorship.
Sure.
Okay. But I want to know about that actual aha moment that knocked you down, blew you up, but then it turned into success, or maybe it didn't.
So what's interesting is understanding that I had to have a put me first mentality in 2024 is my biggest achievement. The breakdown of not putting myself first was my biggest failure. Not identifying it sooner caused me to have problems. Mentally, I would just tune out. I would just all of a sudden start to cry. I would just have issues with, do I really want to do this? Like, what's the purpose of life? The existential thought process. So as you go through that in a year, and this is not a pandemic issue. We're now 2024, right? Like we've gone through all the pandemic issues. You start thinking about things and you go, I'm getting at that age of 50. Start to look at myself and go, I'm not happy. So that was my worst part, not identifying it sooner. The best part was identifying it and having a base now.
Oh, that's amazing, because you sat there and you just mentioned that you'd actually break down.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And what's unique about my situation is I'm the divorced once, remarried, have a baby. So I have a 19-year-old at the time of this recording, a 15-year-old, and 19 months. Yeah. So that's a different dynamic. When you're a 50-year-old person, you have a 19-month child, you have a fairly new marriage, and you got to rebuild that unit. It's not a financial issue. It's actually giving yourself to that little one, which I love doing, but I realize I don't have the same energy. I start looking at myself going, how am I going to be there for that one? How am I going to be there for my wife? How am I going to be there for my daughter? It's so new of a relationship, so young of a child, and I've got all this stuff where I want to put myself first. You can see where the breakdown comes into play.
Man, I can totally see it, because then you look at where you're at. So turning 50, then 10 years, you're 65. And now are you going to be in a chair, or you don't care, you're fat, you're overweight, you smoke too much, you drink too much, and then all of a sudden you're that, which obviously no. Because you've actually started it right now to say where you're at. So one of the questions I ask is that, what was the one thing that you did 5 years ago, that one little thing that you did that you go, wow, I can't believe I did that. That was the greatest thing, because that changed to where you are today, that one little thing, versus it's kind of like seeing your past, your present, and your future, that if you're going to do today, and your future self would say, wow, were you ever smart, Faisal, to do that then? That created whatever that was for you to example. And I'm going to use this as an example. If you look after yourself, you're talking about being yourself, looking after yourself today, prioritizing yourself as number one today. 5 years from now, you're going to be something that you don't know what you're going to be, but you started it.
Yeah.
What was the one thing 5 years ago that changed you for your today?
It's interesting how you say this, and keep in mind, I'm biased because of my background and so forth. 5 years ago, that was the point. So 5 years ago, that was the point where I catapulted my wealth. Just catapulted it. From the business perspective, and my overall net worth just took off. That was the point. And looking back, I'd say that was probably the best move, because if my feeling that I wasn't there from a net worth perspective financially, then I would still put my health in the back burner. So knowing that I had my wealth taken care of, now I can focus on my health. In order for my health to take care of, I had to have a mental, I call it pause, to realize that it's really the health that has to get in the way. And that's been in the way of me not doing what I want to do. So let's go and focus on that. So had I not had the financial wealth created by that time, I would still be grinding and not putting myself first.
And it'd be interesting that you'd look at it, you'd be grinding, then all of a sudden you have that heart attack, or all of a sudden that life moment going, oh no.
Yeah.
And the shoulda, coulda, wouldas.
Absolutely. And it's, I'm fortunate enough to know that it's not a financial issue now for me. I'm fortunate to know that it's a me issue. And sometimes, and a lot of my peers who've felt this way have felt that they had to focus on their health first, then their wealth. I was fortunate enough that the wealth was already there. So I didn't have that concern.
So how do you dig deep on your mindset, as in to be focused on something that you do? Because you're obviously very passionate in what you do and everything you do. Yes, your second marriage. Yes, now you got a kid. Now you got to have a strong mindset, because you do so much.
Yeah. First of all, I have a great team in and around myself, from my spouse to my family members to actually my teams on my businesses. But I have a great mental health professional. I have a therapist that I work with very closely. She knows ins and outs. I have another therapist that I use with my wife. to make sure that this unit, I've gone through a divorce. I know what losing half and all the problems that can create. I definitely want to make sure that I don't screw this one up. So I have a therapist for me and my wife, just for maintenance. It's not because we have issues, just for maintenance. And then I also have an executive coach. I want to make sure that I'm handling everything well from a business perspective as well. So I have a lot of good help around me, guiding me, coaching me, mentoring me to make sure that I can do what I need to do.
What's your greatest mentors?
Oh, shit. My number one mentor that I am close with is my business partner. So Dave is, he is 7 years my senior. And people look at mentor as, look at how much they've accomplished, and therefore you want to be like them. That's not the case with Dave. I'm not saying he's not a person I want to be when I get older, but with him being 7 years my senior, there's one phrase that he said ever since we've been together for the past 20 years. Whatever happens to me, just look into your future, Faisal. It's going to happen to you. And so the things that he goes through in his family, in his health, in his mindsets and so forth, I pick up on that and I go, oh crap, I better make sure it doesn't happen to me, or I better be able to adjust when it does happen. So a mentor being able to tell you, look what's going to happen in the future, because it can happen to you, has been the best guidance I have gotten. Even though he's not telling me what to do, he's saying, here's the beacon, here's the GPS. Get ready for all the traffic in front of you.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So one final thing. What is the one advice you tell everybody right now? Here we are, because we're getting closer to the end here.
Yeah.
What is the one thing you'd like to say out there to anybody, listeners, anybody?
Yeah. I would say it's, people talk about passion in what you do, if it's about yourself or your businesses or your family. I call it purpose instead. Make sure there's purpose behind what you do, because then you'll see the real reason for the outcome. Passion is something you can feel. Purpose is something you do.
That was awesome. You know what, Faisal, thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Like and smash that button right away as soon as you can here on Shed Talk. Faisal, thank you very much for joining me today's episode.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now you know. Shed Talk.